What is up, guys? Wrestling Premiere is here. This is one of those guys that I always pondered, like, what if? What if Rene Dupree was a star? I did think about a couple of these guys, like from time to time, what if Chris Nowinski lasted? What if Rodney Mack was in Triple H's position back in 2003? It's always random things like that. In Rene Dupree's case, it's very unusual to place a 19-year-old on the main roster, let alone developmental. But this guy was there, shining on Raw nearly every week. The guy right now he's only 37. 37, he's younger than Finn Balor and Kenny Omega, and he's still wrestling in Japan. He's still going there. Now, why in the hell didn't he reach the potential set forth by the guys in the back? Well, that's what I'm going to try to answer here. And in this series, I'll look back on a star's WWE. Eventually, we'll dive into their TNA and WCW career. Give some insight as to why the guy never became a star. You guys probably know the reason why, but I do these anyways. I haven't done it in 6 months. I removed the main eventer title because not everybody is supposed to be world champion, right? This guy, he just seemed like somebody WWE would push, because of his physique. Anyways, let's get into it. The son of the Eastern Canadian wrestling promoter Emile Dupree, Rene was no stranger to pro wrestling. This sounds like one of those entertainment channels on YouTube that screw up some minor facts. Anyways, Dupree was very familiar with pro wrestling. His father trained him at the ridiculous age of 13, and by the time he was 17, he was already a somewhat seasoned vet. It's hard to find information on how he developed, but by the time he signed with the WWF, he had already wrestled about 40 matches, which is not bad for a 17-year-old. The World Wrestling Federation came calling in April of 2002, and he was signed to a developmental deal. After a couple of months, he officially debuted on the October 5th, 2002 edition of OVW. Okay, he was 18 at this time. He was treated like a big deal, being called the French Phenom. And no, he ain't The Undertaker. He was being paired with Kenny Bolin. And also, look at the oversized suit. With that suit alone, he'll fit in Evolution easily. He was treated like a pretty big deal, and he also claimed in this promo that within a month, he'll capture the OVW World title, and in 3 months, he'll be on the main roster. Those claims didn't come true, but his time down in Louisville didn't really last that long. Dupree got the chance to face the APA on a few occasions before getting called up in April of 2003. In order to develop properly, I assume, he was paired with a green Sylvain Grenier as La Resistance. On the April 14th, 2003 episode of Raw, a vignette aired signaling the duo's arrival. They were French and were also sympathizers of their nation. The duo had issues with the US and how they do things, and it was one of those America sucks things which for some reason WWE loved doing during this era. On the April 28th episode of Raw, the team made their official debut. They interrupted Scott Steiner's promo, and right out of the gate, they had a hell of a amount of heat. The guys introduced themselves speaking in French, and man, was it loud. This was around the time there was war, and that's why the fans were so reactive to this. The reason why Dupree and Grenier were out there was because of Steiner's remarks towards France 2 weeks earlier. Dupree said that he's above the American way, retaliating, and instead they're lovers and wanted to discuss the issue. Big Papa Pump, though, preferred to use his hands. The numbers game ended up getting to him, and he never recovered. So, on their first night, the team got heat that many can only dream of. Obviously, it's because of world affairs and whatnot, but it also meant that the team had a bright future ahead of them. The Un-Americans, well, they were there previously, but they were too scared to go all out. These guys, though, they weren't afraid at all. They were going to say what Vince tells them to say, and they were going to get booed. Their first official match occurred the following week, and yes, they were hated. And of course they won the match, but afterwards Scott Steiner tried to return the favor. Test comes to his aid, and La Resistance ended up getting thrown out. Since both teams hate each other, a match was made for Judgment Day. Grenier and Dupree against Test and Scott Steiner. The heels end up winning, giving them some momentum and possibly getting the attention of the World Tag Team Champions. Eventually, they did receive that title match at Bad Blood, and at this point, the champions RVD and Kane were going through just about everybody. They went through Chief Morley and William Regal, I believe, the Dudley Boyz, Legion of Doom. But on this night, they weren't exactly on the same page, and it showed during the match when Van Dam crashed and burned right onto Kane. Dupree and Grenier took advantage and became the new tag team champions to complete silence. Okay, a 19-year-old winning one of the tag titles. What the hell? It just showed how much value the company saw in him. They thought this guy was the future. 19 years old. How many wrestlers do you hear about in AEW, Impact, WWE, WCW that were 19, held a major title? It's crazy to think about. The only guy I can think of is Tyler Bate. That's all. Tyler Bate and the Nicholas Kid. From here on, the team continued beating the Americans that challenged for the gold and were gaining heat in the process of doing so. Their promos consisted of reciting the national anthem of France, insulting the US, and they always got a reaction. The young team was plowing through some of Raw's very best, Spike Dudley and Tommy Dreamer, Sergeant Slaughter, until the August 11th episode of Raw. After getting beat in singles competition the previous week, the team faced the Dudleys in tag team action. Bubba and Devon proudly waved the flags of the US, and as for the others, well, they didn't even want to wrestle. Why? Because Rene returned the favor from last week using the flag. There was boos from the fans. Hell, the duo even brought out a wine bottle to celebrate. The following week, the team stuck it to the Dudleys and the fans in the biggest way possible. So, the duo come out, right? Well, one fan caught their eye. Rene made jokes about him, calling him G.I. Joe, and the servicemen didn't want none. The Dudleys had enough, and La Resistance quickly ran off. USA chants intensified, and the Dudleys brought in the serviceman to the ring. He's all representative of America waving the flag, but then he went rogue. The fans were stunned, and La Resistance ended up entering the ring to attack. They were absolutely shocked that this guy ended up being against America. They were completely caught off guard. And honestly, if you watch this live, just think about it. You're not going to think this guy is a wrestler unless you know about everyone. At SummerSlam, same story. The guy, Robert Conway, aided La Resistance in retaining the titles. He was disguised as a cameraman and ended up costing Devon and Bubba the titles. Also, he was actually a part of the group, and he joined them in hating on America. But unlike the duo, though, he was actually in-American and was sick of the ignorant people. At one point, he called them the real terrorists, and the fans were absolutely pissed. They were mentioning the war and whatnot. That was how they gained heat. Heading into the rematch of Unforgiven, which was a tables match, I should note, the French team wanted to stick it to the Dudleys by sending their brother through a table, and man, was it rough. They botched and poor Spike fell onto his head. The guys were still green at the time and they already had heat with the Dudleys. I'll get into that, but this spot didn't really help at all. On Unforgiven, they dropped the titles, yes. It ended up being the Dudleys' final tag team title reign in WWE. It was their 17th one, by the way. It was a handicap match. La Resistance had the advantage because Spike was gone and whatnot, but they lost. Following this, La Resistance didn't really do all that much. There was one segment with the Rock and Sock connection, which was pretty cool. Other than that, they did challenge for the titles, but they weren't really that much of a big deal. When I think of Raw late 03, early 04, I don't think about La Resistance at all compared to the summer of 03. That's what I'm saying. They did compete at WrestleMania 20 though, so there's that. Grenier suffered a neck injury back in September and wouldn't return until the next night, the night after WrestleMania. Unfortunately for the trio, they were once again reduced to a duo the following week. Damn it. And they haven't had a poodle by the name of Fifi. Before I get into it, I just want to mention a little segment Rene was a part of the week beforehand. So he gets a ticket for an odd reason. Why? Because Austin hates heels. And he gets offended and decides to call out the Texas Rattlesnake. The sheriff was annoyed by this and stomped a mud hole in the French native. As for the Dudley Heat thing, well, this is what Dupree had to say about a couple of years ago. And I quote, "Oh my god, I've had so many concussions from Bubba Ray Dudley, it's not even funny. You know Chris Nowinski had to retire because of Bubba Ray giving him concussions, right? Devon, it's universal, everyone likes Devon because he's a pro, but Bubba can be difficult to work with." And he also gave a little story about Bubba Ray. One time in the ring, Sly screwed up a spot, and then Bubba punched him in the face and bloodied his nose, and Sly asked him why backstage, and Bubba went off and punched him in the face again. I heard Rico also had a big-ass issue with Bubba Ray Dudley back in 04, so there's that. Anyways, like I said, Dupree was the member of La Resistance who was drafted to Smackdown. Still didn't get to escape a stunner, though. Now that he was a single star, Dupree was finally gonna get his chance. La Resistance became a French-Canadian team, and neither Sylvain nor Dupree enjoyed working together, so it was a positive thing for both men. They patched up now, that's one thing to know, so yeah. On his first night on SmackDown, Dupree defeated Billy Kidman and had a little confrontation with the United States champion John Cena. The champ gave him a welcoming rap, telling him that Eddie steals wallets, Big Show and Rikishi destroy bathrooms, and he obviously made fun of France. I mean, he's a babyface back in the 2000s. With the move to SmackDown, Dupree received a talk show by the name of Café de Rene. His first guest, it was Tori Wilson. First of all, I assume he stole Kurt Angle's suit, and the French Phenom was all about trying to piss off the crowd. You people are so unrefined. And he's all friendly with Tori initially, but then he spoke about the Big Show incident, which is a whole other story I'll eventually get into. And this led to Dupree criticizing an American woman, stating that Tori's an example of what's wrong with them. Hell, he even said that she's like his Fifi, meaning she's a... and she retaliated. John Cena made the save and he sent the French Phenom right out of there, but a couple of minutes later, he returns the favor and Cena loses to the Guerreros. Over the next couple of weeks, both men continuously brawled with each other. This resulted in a match at Judgment Day. Now, for some reason, Dupree was always looking to do something to Tori and Cena makes a save. And I should ask you guys, isn't this like in the first SmackDown vs. Raw season mode, or am I high? Like, it's like the first storyline you play in season mode. Please comment down below if that's the case, because I haven't played that game in a long ass time. with that said, the Judgment Day match is what I assume everybody thinks of when you ask for a Rene Dupree singles match. And once again, he aged 20 years old on pay-per-view challenging for a mid-card title. It's nothing short of impressive. The match itself was decent, you know. It was the only match I've ever seen Cena miss the 5-knuckle shuffle, which is pretty shocking to think about. The crowd is pretty entertained, and you might like it. I mean, the crowd was pretty hot for it and whatnot. And sure, it might have belonged on TV, but still, it was a fun match. They had another one on that week's SmackDown, a lumberjack match that once again went Cena's way. Following this, Dupree was stuck in the mid-card for months facing the likes of Rob Van Dam, John Cena again, and Rey Mysterio. Insults towards America slowly decreased, I believe, and in September, he randomly teamed up with Kenzo Suzuki to challenge London and Kidman for the Tag Team Championships. Once again, a team Dupree faces has some issues within. This time around, Kidman wasn't comfortable hitting the shooting star. He walked out, and Paul London with a shoulder injury was left alone. London suffered, and Rene Dupree and Kenzo Suzuki became the new Tag Team Champions. Still one of the most memorable tag teams of the 2000s, that's for sure. As champions, the team entered a program with another randomly paired team, Rob Van Dam and Rey Mysterio. I could swear that this was the only team they faced during this reign. The matches themselves weren't that bad. RVD and Rey were such a fun team that I wish we got to see more of them. But yes, like, if you swap RVD and Rey for another tag team, say Hardcore and Charlotte, I don't think those matches would be as good as they were. They were the dynamic duo of 2004. They were fun. Yes, both teams traded wins on pay-per-views and SmackDowns, and eventually, the titles were up for grabs once again in December, and this is when RVD and Rey captured them. For odd reasons, they were already scheduled to face off at Armageddon, but it was pushed forward to SmackDown. Dupree and Suzuki had one more match, but they lost, and following this, the team abruptly parted ways. Dupree's time on SmackDown from here on consisted of losing, and before I move on to the next part, I gotta mention the story with Bob Holly. Oh man, this is one of the more crazy stories from the 2000s. Let me explain it very quickly. So Dupree travels with Hardcore and Billy Gunn, right? Well, one night, Billy Gunn ain't there, and so the car's registered to Bob's name. This is because Dupree wasn't over the age of 25, and he wasn't allowed to rent a car. Hardcore wasn't able to travel with Rene, and so the young star went alone. He ended up violating some sort of law. I believe it was a parking ticket. And since the car's registered to Holly and Dupree didn't know what to do with the ticket, he asked somebody about it. They're like, oh, nothing, it's not a big issue. This wasn't a wrestler, it was a hairdresser or somebody. And they ended up throwing it away. It's a conflicting story because Dupree literally stated in another interview that it was sent to Holly's mail. I think I'm going to go with the latter because, well, he claimed it and Holly claims it too. So I believe that's the true story. I don't know, it's confusing. Hardcore, though, claims the original story, you know? Dupree threw it in the trash or something, the one that I just mentioned, and he confronts him over it. Dupree offers to pay double of the ticket, but Holly decides to take it out on him in a different way. Now, what does Hardcore claim? He claims that Dupree had a bad attitude and didn't care. Also, he had to resolve it in court because there was a warrant out for his arrest in Washington. As a result of this, Bob's license was suspended, and what followed, man? He whooped his ass like a government mule. Holly delivered legit blows to Rene's face. He's trying to run away during a live event, but Holly brings him back in and throws a chair into his face. It was such a stiff-ass shot. And it was some wild stuff, and obviously it wasn't televised, but this thing was big. Many thought it was wrong of Holly to take liberties with Dupree in the ring, and as a result of this, he was fined $10,000. It's a crazy story. Both guys have a different perspective of how it went down. Take it as you will. He was drafted to Raw during the 2005 draft, but he literally made only 2 appearances. He ended up going down to OVW in order to continue developing, and by the time he returned, he was on the ECW brand. On the August 8, 2006 episode of ECW, Rene Dupree for the first time in a year appeared on the main roster. He ditched the accent and was claiming to be the most extreme wrestler on the brand. Obviously got the ECW faithful angry, you know? And also he's like, bonsoir. A month later, he made his official debut, same music but no robe, and his claims of extreme weren't exactly met during this match, held during the run, but he actually came out with a victory on this night. Sure, Kevin Thorne provided an unlikely assist, but hey, a win's a win. Funny enough, that was the only singles match he won, and no, he didn't have that many matches. For someone that was completely repackaged, they never followed through with him on television. His biggest match came on the December 19th episode of ECW when he faced the champion himself, Bobby Lashley. He was easily dismantled, and after months of being directionless, there was finally something for the French phenom. He was going to reform La Resistance with Sylvain Grenier. They destroyed the Jobbers, and it was clear that they had a future ahead of them. Now, before I get into what happened, rumor has it Dusty Rhodes tried getting the WWE to add a tag team division to ECW. There was apparently going to be new titles and all that to coincide with this, but Rene Dupree was suspended for violating the wellness policy. This was strike 2, I should note. He was suspended in June of 2006 for violating it, And as a result of this, he went to rehab, but he was abruptly released on July 26, 2007. The claims made by the dirt sheets is that he might have violated the wellness policy, but Dupree debunked those claims in an interview a couple of years ago. Here's what he had to say, and I quote, "Again, the Chris Benoit thing, and then I relapsed. I relapsed on my drug of choice at the time, and sitting at home looking at the TV, I mean, it was on every channel. Every channel, Nancy Grace, just everybody was ripping into your profession, and this here is a guy that you've looked up to, and all of a sudden, it's, you know what I mean? And just coming out of rehab and this happens, and my rehab was in Atlanta of all places. It's kind of creepy. Yeah, I relapsed off that. I said, you know what? I actually listened to what they told me in there. I don't want to die. I don't want to be a statistic. Yeah, I love the wrestling business, but I'm not going to die for it. Sorry. I have way too much to live for. I come from a very wealthy family. Sorry." And if he thought he was going to return following the incident, yeah, the initial plan was. And you know what? Johnny would accept it at first. He was like, "Give you a week to think about it." Because he did not want to get rid of me. And I actually did show up at TV in Corpus Christi to say goodbye to everybody. And if looks could kill, the way Vince was looking at me, I'd be dead. The death stare. He doesn't like when people leave. He didn't want to understand. But here's the deal, dude. The last thing you needed was a dead 23-year-old on your roster. That's exactly where I was headed. So it's best for me, and it was best for them. So there you have it. The reasons why Dupree wasn't a star, I assume, was because of what went on backstage. I think he could have been much bigger than he was. And does that mean world champion? Not really, but still, he left when he was 23. Had he remained, who knows? He actually had potential. The guy at this point was literally a 10-year veteran, as ridiculous as that may sound. 23 years old, yet heaps of wrestling knowledge in his arsenal. Like I said, his attitude may have rubbed a lot of people the wrong way. Add to that, Vince loses interest in just about everything. I found a rumor on the internet that Dupree was asked to stop doing the French tickler, which is like the Cesaro swing of that era. And he violated the ban during one match, and they got angry. And maybe that's just it. Like, the guys in the back, the stars and some of the agents and all, they just didn't push for him. They didn't support him, I guess. That's what I think. Because I looked at these dirt sheet stuff. I tried looking into everything. And this is the only thing I could come up with. It makes sense to me. I believe that he just wasn't liked backstage. They thought this guy, he comes in, he has a bad attitude or whatever. But yeah, he was a young kid. And I just wonder, like, what if he went to TNA? I know they like to push ex-WWE stars, but would he have actually rose to the occasion, like in 2007? Because he went straight to Japan. He didn't return to North America at all. Still to this day, he doesn't wrestle in North America. He wrestles in Japan. What do you guys think of Rene Dupree? Please comment down below. That's it for this video. Make sure you hit a French tickler on the like button and perhaps the bon nuit on the subscribe button. Peace. I'm out.